Now we get to the free-to-air presentation of the Dhamma. So, I hope you enjoyed your lunch. I was talking with the Venerable here, how surprised I was that as a monk you only eat 1 meal a day or 2 meals a day at most. We only eat a tiny bit. And I couldn't believe just how much all our lay people ate. And you're going to eat about 4 or 5 times a day. But it doesn't matter. No, you can't. Not the ones upstairs anyway. They're in the high realms. In this realm, maybe. This may be a lower realm. But, as my teacher Ajahn Brahm said, just that's only food for the body. The most important meal is happening now because this is food for the heart. And just like in our modern world, that sometimes we have junk food and sometimes we have health food. It's the same with the things which you put in your mind. Sometimes it's junk food for the mind. You know what that is? Junk food for the mind? TV. And health food for the mind, what's that? Dhamma, yes. So this is going on a health food for the mind retreat. So having fed your body, now we're going to feed your mind. Because the topic for this afternoon's session is Anicca. Would I actually call it impermanence, or actually a little bit more than impermanence. Now you must have already noticed just how fast things disappear from your plate. So there was a great teaching of the impermanence of things. And you notice the joy, the happiness of the taste. It's there for a moment and then it's gone. And sometimes the expectation, anticipation is the most delicious. Can you imagine now just your favourite food? Your favourite bowl of noodles. Can you see it now? Can you smell it? It's the anticipation for many people is the happy part, and as soon as you get it, it just goes away so quickly. When I was a young monk, just gone to Thailand, everything which I was used to had disappeared. The climate was strange, the language was strange, and the food was strange too. Even the first 2 days when I asked the way, where's the toilet? They took me to a room. And I said, this isn't a toilet, there's nowhere to sit down. It was an Asian toilet and I didn't understand. And so many things were different, and especially the food. And so after a little while, 2 or 3 days, I started getting homesick. I started thinking of fish and chips, what you eat in England. Then I realised, hang on, I've been a vegetarian for the last 3 years. Even when I could have it, I never did. But then, after I think 7 years as a monk, I went back home to visit my mother. And I thought, at last, after 7 years of Thai food, I can get some English food. Maybe I'll get some chips. And as soon as I went into my mother's house, it was a strange thing what happens with desire and craving. Sometimes when you crave something, it always goes wrong. She had a special pan which she fried the chips in. I've known it for years and years. In English cuisine, you never throw away that chip pan or clean it. The older it is, the more delicious the chips. But as soon as I walked in, the first thing she said was, I've always been wanting to throw away that pan. And she throwed it away right in front of my eyes. And I thought, oh my goodness, so close yet so far. But finally I did get some chips. A Thai man gave them to me. And you know what I found out? They did not taste as nice as I dreamt. Oh, what a letdown. Because it's the trouble with our desires. As soon as we have them, we don't want them anymore. Even our desires are impermanent, unreliable. And so it's great to be able to contemplate just how these things, they come and they go and they come. And they're just little desires. It's a waste of time giving them more importance than they really need. And the thing is that when we don't understand the ebb and flow of life, the ephemeral nature of our experiences, of our friends, we don't understand that these things are going anyway. We might as well let them go. We've got no choice because they're saying goodbye. We might as well wave goodbye too. But when we don't understand that, what happens is we get attached and we think we own these things, and that is the cause of suffering. Sometimes I ask myself, Ajahn Brahm, what do you own? And you don't own much at all. Do you own your house? Do you own your car? Do you own your family? Whatever you own is what we attach to. And that is a cause of suffering. I've been teaching this for many years. And one of my disciples, the only thing of value he owned was a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. It was worth about 30 or 40,000 Australian dollars. It was a classic old model, which was worth a lot. He only lived in a rented apartment. He only had ordinary clothes. That was the one thing which he had was of value, which he could not part with. And he told me once he went shopping. He parked his expensive bike in the shopping centre and went down to buy some things. And when he returned, it was gone. Someone had stolen it. And he looked and he thought, that's the only thing I own of value, the only thing which I really like, and now it's stolen. And he remembered all the teachings of Buddhism, and he said, Anicca. He let it go, and he was so at peace. And as soon as he let it go, he felt so much happiness. He'd really understood the Dhamma. He felt, almost half enlightened. It's a strange thing what happens when you get it right, you understand the Dhamma. The next thing he noticed was he was on the wrong level of the car park. He went down the next level, there was his bike. Hadn't been so much. But it was a great experience for him. He was tested out and he won. Good on him. So it was a test to see if he understood impermanence of all your possessions. Because why worry? They come to you and they go. The share market goes up, the share market goes down. And then it goes up again. I always call them yo-yo markets. But this is just our life. When we understand about what impermanence is, that things are always changing. When we understand and we adapt to the reality of life, then we don't need to suffer so much. The suffering is, as I said this morning, when we don't understand reality, we have unrealistic expectations of life. So it's great to know that things pass, that we have our loved ones come into our life, and then they leave again. Sometimes you look at your children. Where do they come from? You don't know where your children come from. You get pregnant, there's a boy or girl in there, but you don't know where they've been before. Really what it's like is inviting someone into your house for 18 or 19 years from the street. You don't know where they're from or who they are. That's what you do with your children. They come with their own karma from the previous places. And they stay with you a while, and then they leave again. Really, you should know that from the very beginning. That your job is just to nurture them for 18, 19, 20 years. And then once they got their degree, then you should kick them out and say goodbye. But how many of you can do that? Can't you be like the birds? The birds are so wise. They really look after their young. They sit on the eggs for such a long time. If you think that you've got a sore bottom sitting in here just for one day, imagine what it's like to be a bird. They haven't even got a cushion to sit on. Imagine sitting on an egg. It's the wrong shape to make your bottom feel good. But they've got to sit on their egg until it hatches, and as soon as it hatches, they've got to fly around frying worms and all sorts of other things for their chicks. And they teach their chickens how to fly, and once their little chicks fly, then that's it. Bye-bye. Wouldn't it be wonderful to be like that? As soon as your children are old enough, boot, out you go. See you later. Unfortunately, that many parents these days, they keep their children in the house for such a long time, and the children like staying with their parents for such a long time. There's apparently even a movie about that I saw in the newspaper today, or on the plane coming in here. I forget what the movie was called. It's all about a boy who was staying with his mum, about 30 or 35 years of age, and hadn't moved out at all. But to realize that these people don't belong to us, they are impermanent, they go according to their karma, we go according to our karma. If we can only realize that they will leave, that things change, that then we will be free. I was telling a lady who was in trouble last night that no matter how she's feeling now, it will always change. There was the story of the Emperor's Ring, which is a wonderful story which helps heal many people's pain and suffering in this world. A long time ago, there was a young man who took over a kingdom. Being a young man, he wasn't all that skillful in running the business of a kingdom. So every time the kingdom was going well and there was prosperity and people were happy, he would hold celebrations, Commonwealth Games, parties, Asian Game, whatever it was. He would hold parties and celebrations. And because he was spending so much money in celebrations and spending so much time enjoying himself and allowing other people to enjoy themselves, the economy of the country didn't last very long, or the good economy didn't last very long. The good times didn't last long at all. And when there was problems in the country, when there was unhappiness amongst the people, and the economy was not going well, and everyone was unhappy, he was so upset himself that he was spending so much time in his room sulking and getting miserable and getting depressed. And because of that, the bad times seemed to last longer than usual. So he was not a very good ruler. But the ministers, his advisors, they were very sharp. I think they were sort of presidents of the Buddhist Gem Fellowship or something like that. So they went up to their king, or they met together and they came up with a plan. What they did was to ask one of the jewelers to make a special gold ring for the ruler. It was an ordinary gold ring except for the words on the outside, which were engraved very clearly. The words, "This too will pass. This too will pass." And so, having engraved it on the ring, they presented it to their ruler and asked him to wear it on all occasions. And because he wore it on all occasions, he would keep looking at it. So when times were difficult, when there was problems in the kingdom, when there was so many things to do to fix up, he would always look at that ring. Remember, this too will pass. It won't always be this bad. But he would also look at the ring in the good times as well, to realize in times of health and prosperity and happiness and comfort that this too will pass as well. Well, that meant that when, during the bad times, he never got that upset or depressed that he wouldn't do any work. This too will pass gave him hope. And hope gave him inspiration to work, to try, to endeavor. And what happened was the bad times never lasted so long. And whenever there was good times, he realized that this is also impermanent, it isn't always like this. And so he would work, he would endeavor, he would strive. Even in the good times, he would not rest. And that way, the good times lasted so long. The bad times lasted so short that he became a very, very successful ruler, loved by everybody. And this is a simile of our lives, because we are the ruler of our body, of our family, of our little area. And sometimes we experience some suffering, some difficulties. And what do most people do? Oh, they get depressed and they sulk and they get miserable and they don't do anything, which means the bad times last longer than they should. So whenever there's any difficulty, always remember this too will pass. But also when things are going well, always remember this too will pass. And when you remember that, you will always put all the energy and effort you possibly can into this moment. Because this moment is so valuable. And you won't let it pass without enjoying it. And if it gets difficult, it doesn't matter, it will pass. As Ajahn Brahm, as I said the other night, went to tell me when I was sick in the hospital, with a bad fever, feeling miserable, feeling in a third world hospital, in a place such a long way from home. I think I was a 24-year-old man, a monk. So weak, so terrible. And the teacher came in. Imagine you were sick and say the chief priest came to see you. Chief Reverend came all the way from Brickfields. He's old and sick himself, but he comes to see you. Oh, you'd be so honoured and so privileged, you feel so good. But actually I have to be very careful now. Because when I go and visit people in hospital, because I'm very, very busy, if I walk into someone's room and they're in bed, they get very worried. Why is Ajahn Brahm coming to see me? Is it something the doctor hasn't said? I'm dying! So I've got to be very careful if I go and see someone in a hospital, because they think I'm so busy, I can only be visiting them if it's really important. But if the Chief Reverend came and see you. This is what it was like when Ajahn Brahm came to see me. But you all know what he said when he came to see me. I was happy for a second when I saw him. And when he said what he said, I got really depressed again. Because what he said is, Brahma Wangsa, you'll either get better or you'll die. Either way, your sickness isn't going to last. It's Anicca. I didn't want my sickness to last, but I wanted to last. And that was a problem there, but it was so truthful. So whenever you're in sickness or in pain, always remember, this too will pass. And if you remember that, it gives you strength, it gives you hope, so you never get really depressed. Even when you are depressed, because depression is a huge problem for many people in this world, always remember it won't stay the same. It'll either get worse or it'll get better. But it'll never stay the same, and it usually doesn't get worse. So what we can do there, this too will pass, gives us hope, gives us energy, gives us a way of looking forward to and the truth of the fact is, it doesn't last. Sometimes, I never said this morning, but I sometimes was wondering about the happiest moments in people's lives. And sometimes people say the happiest moment in their life is when they get married. The day when I got married was the happiest time in my life. And why is that? And I noticed that what real happiness is always like the pause between two moments of suffering. That's why getting married is the happiest moment of life, because all the suffering of finding a partner and arranging the marriage, that's a lot of suffering. And then you have the marriage ceremony, and then you have the suffering which comes afterwards. But it's true, one of the happiest times of which I saw was must have been about 20 years ago. I was meeting someone in the airport in Perth, and this group of refugees came through. They were Baha'i refugees. After the Iranian Revolution, they were persecuted and driven from the country, and they lost everything. Many of their family were killed or tortured. And they finally, after staying some time in refugee camps, I think in Pakistan, they were resettled in Australia. And as they came through the customs after passing the immigration, and they came into Australia, they literally leapt in the air and punched the air. Yeah, they made it. Freedom. Future prosperity. They could practice their religion. They weren't going to be tortured. And after a while, all the people coming through, all their friends were cheering. And then suddenly I found myself cheering as well, until I realized I wasn't a Baha'i, I was trying to meet somebody else. But the joy was infectious. And these were such happy people. And I started to reflect afterwards, why were they so happy? And the reflection came that the degree of their happiness was a measure of the suffering they just passed through. If they hadn't been tortured, if they hadn't have lost all their friends and their money, they wouldn't have felt so happy coming into the country. Their happiness was a measure of the suffering which had gone before. And they also, sometimes you see in the newspaper, celebrations after someone wins the FA Cup, or they win the World Cup soccer, or they finally get a gold medal in the Olympics. And I sometimes wonder, why do they have so much happiness? It's only because the amount of suffering which went before. I don't know if any of you do follow sport, but it's the most stupid thing to follow. Look at this, they're coming to have the Soccer World Cup. Don't go see the Soccer World Cup in June. Come to Perth. For our global conference instead. And we didn't realise that when we were scheduling this, it's just the beginning of the World Cup soccer. That was a big mistake. But look at the World Cup soccer. I think 32 teams are going to go. Where's it going to be held? In Germany. 32 teams are going to go to Germany. 31 teams are going to come back home miserable. Even the one which gets to the final and loses at the last hurdle, they're the ones who suffer the most. So close yet so far. And the team which does win, they got 1 or 2 days happiness and it's back to suffering again. Oh, you've got a 32-1 chance of losing. That doesn't seem good odds to me. But if you come to Perth for our conference, you've got 100-0 chance of winning. But why is it that people get so happy when their team wins? Because of all the suffering which went before. When you look at the happiness and sufferings of life, isn't it what you take to be happiness is just some suffering ending? That happiness is a pause between 2 moments of suffering. And suffering is a pause between 2 moments of happiness. I sometimes reflected upon that when I started to think of the concept of a heaven. How can you have a heaven world? If it was always beautiful and nice, you would not notice it anymore. Because the nature of our consciousness is always to compare. If you had beautiful food every day, you wouldn't notice it. If you had a beautiful aircon every day, it's only when it didn't work you would notice it. You notice after a while of reflection that even if you were in heaven, after a while it would not be happiness anymore. You take it for granted. And I remembered a Christian theologian, I think in the Middle Ages, once said that in the Christian heaven, 1 day every year you get taken to hell. Otherwise, you would not appreciate what heaven was like. And it was a wonderful way of understanding what happiness and suffering really is. It is inherent in the happiness and suffering that we have differences, changes. Otherwise, we would just not know what is beauty, what is ugliness, what is happiness, what is suffering. By its very nature, heaven has to be impermanent. By its very nature, hell has to be impermanent. Otherwise, you get used to it. I remember reading a very moving book some years ago. It was called Prisoner Without a Name, Soul Without a Number. It was a story of a journalist who'd been interned in Argentina during the times of the generals. During that military junta, many activists, left-wing journalists, disappeared in the middle of the night and were killed or tortured by the military regime of that time. This was a journalist who always walked a very dangerous line in his articles. And one day it happened in the middle of the night. The secret police came for him and took him away and put him in his underground cells where he was tortured. It was only the fact that he was quite a well-known journalist and had friends in the United States who were contacted by his wife that they daren't actually kill him. He survived. And after he survived, he wrote this book about his experiences. But the most interesting part of his book was saying after months and months in these jails, being tortured on electric shock machines and beaten, he said the worst pain of the whole time came when the guards handed over a letter from his wife. He had told his wife, if ever I disappear, please don't try to contact me. He had got used to that deprivation, to that pain, to being in prison. The letter from his wife brought back the contrast. He remembered the life in a warm and loving family. He had something to compare his present torment with. And he said that was the worst pain of all. It's why, in the old way of trying to extract information from people, we always have the good cop, bad cop routine. Without the good cop, the bad cop doesn't hurt so much. You find that within happiness and pain, it is the contrast which is important. Even in pain in hell, you will not notice that until every now and again there is some happiness. This whole story of this man, because of some bad karma, was taken down to hell. He was shown 3 rooms. The first room, that people were being, it was so hot, people were boiling, and even without clothes on, they were sweating, and it was so uncomfortable. It was a hot room. He said, "You like that?" He said, "No, I hate the heat." So they took him into the second hell room. And the second hell room, it was just so cold. People were freezing. It was like being in sort of Antarctica. And he said, "Do you want that?" He said, No. That's too cold. I hate the cold." They took him into the third room. In the third room, people were standing up to their necks in this filth, in excrement and terrible stuff. But they were having cups of tea. And he always liked his tea. So he said, "Okay, I'll take that room." So he went into that room, and they stood up there in the filth. It smelled awful, and they gave him a cup of tea. And he hadn't finished his tea yet before the guard said, "Okay, boys, tea break over, back on your heads." Even in hell they have a tea break. Now the point of that story is that without comparisons you would not understand just what happiness and pain truly is. Anicca is part of all this. So, but anyhow, once one understands the impermanence of all things, this too will pass. It actually helps us understand the reality of life and actually how to deal with things. We can enjoy things while they're here, but we always understand while they're here, they're not going to be here forever. If we can understand that from the start, then we understand the Dhamma. Many times Ajahn Chah would hold up a cup. And he would hold up a cup and say, "Do you see the crack in this glass or this cup?" And I thought it was crazy. There's got no crack in this glass or this cup. He said, "There is one there, but it's microscopic. You can't see it yet, but it's there. One day, because someone will drop this cup or they will kick it over, that crack will expand and this will break." It's got a crack in it, remember? He said, because it's got a crack in it, you know it's impermanent, subject to break. He said, that's why you care. If this was made out of some unbreakable plastic, which would survive a nuclear explosion and last to the end of the eon or beyond, he said, you wouldn't need to care for this cup. You could kick it, you could drop it, you could throw it around, it wouldn't break. But because it's got a crack in it, that is why you care. And then he pointed to me and said, see that monk over there? He's got a crack in him as well. You may not see it yet, But one day that crack will open up and I will die. Each one of you are cracked. One day that crack will open up and you will die too. Your children, your loved ones. Because you've got a crack in you, because that one day that will open up and you die, that is why you care. People who contemplate anicca, impermanence, they don't become cold and heartless. The more you contemplate the ephemeral nature of all things, that things one day will pass, the more compassionate you become. Because all your loved ones have got a crack in them. That's why you handle them gently and you care for them. I learned that lesson when my father cracked when he died. Because he died when I was only 16 years of age, I felt very guilty. I was a young man growing up, and it's a nature of young men growing up, it's going through their adolescence, to compete with their father. You are men, males, it's just in your genes. And so I was competing with my father. The way I would argue with him, he liked Frank Sinatra. That was his generation. I liked Jimi Hendrix. So when he put on his Frank Sinatra records, I put on my Jimi Hendrix records. Jimi Hendrix was much louder than Frank Sinatra. So I won. And a little thing like that, you would think that was just a teenager growing up. When he died, I felt so guilty about that. I thought, what did I do that for? I loved that man and cared for him. Why did he just do a stupid, idiotic thing like stop his enjoyment of the music he liked? But now it was too late. My father had died. That taught me a lesson. You can't afford to hurt anybody, especially the people in your family. You don't know how long they're going to be there. And if you have hurt them, you can't wait until tomorrow to say sorry. You can't wait until later on today to say how much you care for them. You have to say it now because of anicca. Things change. Opportunities pass. It's not always here. It's gone. And what a great shame that is. That's why it's important to understand the sort of the ephemeral nature of things. It makes life more important. It's like the story of this friend of mine who was a businessman in Sydney. A very successful businessman. He wasn't a Buddhist, but I think he became a tantamount to one after this experience. Just a few days after his annual medical checkup, he received a phone call from his doctor. It was a personal friend. The first words of the doctor were, "Is your wife at home?" Why would a doctor say that? It's like Ajahn Brahm coming to visit you in hospital. Something is wrong. So straight away, that's what he said. What's wrong? Actually, my wife is here. Good, said the doctor. I'm sorry to report that you have got some results of your blood tests back from the lab. You've got a rare type of blood cancer. I'm sorry to say it's untreatable and terminal. This man thought he was in the best of health. Like most people when they get these shocks from their doctor. You think you're fine, and now you finally find out you've got a cancer. What most people would say, and what he said, was, how long have I got to live? You know that doctors can't answer that. I know this one man who went to see his doctor, and the doctor told him, I'm sorry sir, you've only got 1 month to live. His reply was, Doctor, I don't think I can pay your bills within 1 month. Okay, said the doctor, I'll give you 2 months to live. Business is business after all. So, this man, the doctor actually told him, so this one is a true story, not the joke. The doctor actually told him, maybe 2 months, if you're lucky 3, but unlikely 4. It gave him a time span. He was that close to death. What he did when he realized such impermanence of his life, that he was only going to live a few more months, he changed the priorities of his life. He'd always promised his family to take them on a trip to Europe. You know what it's like, all the promises you make? You promise me you'll come and see me in Perth for the conference. Now he had to go. There was no time to dither. He actually sold his business. For those of you who are in business, if you sell a business very quickly, you never get a good price. But he was very lucky. He got a fair price for his business. He said, no, it's quite fortunate. He bought tickets for him and his family. When it's the last time, money is no object. He bought first-class tickets for him and his family in the best hotels. This was the last time for him and his family to enjoy their company. And he was holding the tickets in the hand, so the story goes, when the telephone rang again. It was a doctor. I don't know how to tell you this, said the doctor. 2 men, same surname, wrong results. You are perfectly healthy. A true story happened. Yeah, no, you may have heard stories like this. Even in medicine, sometimes mistakes do happen. Unfortunately. But they do. And because of that, he never sued that doctor. He never got angry at him. In fact, he calls that doctor like his guru, his teacher. Because he went on that holiday with his family, had a wonderful time. When he came back, he had enough money left over to start another business, which was quite successful. But this time, he didn't work so hard and so long. From that experience, he realized that time passes so quickly. And what's really important is not his wealth or his business success. What was most important was his family and his enjoyment. Dhamma. And that was what impermanence taught him. Because the cup was cracked and someday it was going to die, the most important thing to do was to care. So the importance of Anicca is realizing just the necessary to not waste time in your life. Whatever you need to do it now. And do the most important things first. Otherwise you just will not have time. And when a person does die, when the glass does crack, we always say, I expected that. I always know that a person understands the Dhamma when you get a telephone call in the middle of the night or in the afternoon or early morning, doesn't matter, and you hear that, say, an auntie or an uncle has died, and you say, I expected that. What do you mean you expected that? It was a heart attack. It was an accident. No one could know. I expected that they could die at any time. And if you'd cared, you'd enjoyed the time together, what more could you have done? You're only sad if you've wasted your time and haven't enjoyed the time you had as best you possibly could do. That's the only sadness in life. Wasting time. So when it does happen, if your cup is cracked and finally is destroyed, I've had such wonderful cups of tea in this cup. What a wonderful time we've had together. Thank you so much. That's what Anicca teaches me. Anicca teaches me how to care when I have these things and how to let them go when they crack. And not to let them go with grief or with too many tears. Again, part of my life is to counsel people who lose their loved ones, and the reason why they cry is they never understood Anicca when they were alive. They thought that person would always be there for them. and now they're gone and they're disappointed. You had unrealistic expectations. When you marry someone you love very deeply, you can't expect them to live till 70 or 80. If they do, that's a bonus. So you have to enjoy their company when you have them there with you. That's why, husbands and wives, you should not argue with each other. You don't know how long you have to say sorry. Enjoy each other's company while you're there. Understand your husband is cracked. I don't mean it that way. And that way you'll care for these people because they're going to go soon. You don't know when. And that's why one of my favourite stories is when my father died and I wasn't crying. And I told this story last night, and I told it many times. It's an important story because it actually shows you how you can enjoy life with impermanence. In fact, impermanence makes you enjoy life even more. And that was the story. When my father died, I didn't cry. I had no grief whatsoever. Never had grief even now. And I've told you many stories about my father. And it was a strange thing for me as a 16-year-old not to cry. And it took me a long time to understand how I felt. And the way I felt is well explained in the simile of the concert. The simile of the concert. As a young man, I loved music. And I used to go to many concerts in London. At the end of the concert, whether it's a concert those days or these days, when the band or the orchestra finishes, everyone stands up and shouts for more. Have you done that? Clapping, shouting, more, more. And it is the custom for the band or the orchestra to continue for another 5 or 10 minutes. But after those 5 or 10 minutes, the orchestra has to stop. They have to go home. And so did I. And every time I walked out of those concert halls, or pubs, or clubs, it was always raining. At least that's how I remember it in London at night time. Always dark and very cold. It was miserable outside. And I knew I'd probably never hear such a great orchestra or band again. But never once did I feel sad at the end of a great concert. After listening to such wonderful music, I never cried. I felt so privileged to have been there at the time. And I remembered some of that music for a long time afterwards. I felt blessed to have had the opportunity to be there. And that's how I felt when my father died. It was the end of a great concert. A short concert, only 16 years. But to me, it was a privilege to have been there for that 16 years. I never felt sad, nor did I cry. No more than you would cry or feel sad after a great concert, or opera, or play. What a wonderful performance that was. How lucky I was to have been there at the time. So this evening, when I fly out of KL, I don't expect anyone to be crying. Think, oh, what a wonderful performance that was. You feel so happy to have been here for the 2 or 3 days. Now, isn't that a wonderful, positive way of looking at death? How many of you have cried when a loved one has died? Didn't you understand they were cracked already? They had to die. What a wonderful time you had together. Can't you enjoy the very fact that you've known them for such a long time? You've been have so many happy memories. Can't we feel joy at a death? Look at it this way. When a child is born, they cry. And all the relatives are smiling and laughing. But when somebody dies, if you see them in the coffin, they're always smiling. And everyone else is crying. We're always out of sync. Really, we should be crying when a baby is born. Oh, more suffering. They've got to go to school and do homework. And when they die, oh, what joy, they're free. So anyway, at least we can celebrate a life. What a wonderful life that was, and how lucky we were to have known them from that time. It's a different way of understanding Anicca. All things disappear and fade away. It's the same with this world of ours. All your possessions, they all fade away. And all the great monuments of this world, all the monasteries which we build, it's only brick, it's only concrete and steel. That just fades away. But what doesn't fade away is people's karma, their goodness, their kindness, their generosity. That's why one of my favourite sayings is that people are much more important than buildings. Do you know actually the word in English church, that never was meant to describe a building. The original meaning of church was a congregation, was a group of people who would meet together. The church meant the people. But what happened in Europe and the United States, that people built these massive buildings and called them the church. And the building became more important than the people who sat there inside. So you have these enormous, impressive buildings which were so cold and lonely inside. They missed the point. That's why I always say, if it's in a monastery or a temple, the people are most important, not the building. So you don't have to build this immense building where people don't feel happy. You can have an old wreck of a building, but happy people, and that's more important. The church meant the people, but the name got transferred onto the building. The building became important, and in many Western countries, like Australia, they've got all these empty buildings now called churches. The church, the people have moved on. So it's important to understand just what is important in life. The people are important. Understand that. You understand that these buildings here, they just come and go. Even your body comes and goes. It's impermanent. And all the Botox in the world won't stop that impermanence. I don't know why people are afraid of getting old. It's great being able to get old. You're not expected to do so much anymore. The only trouble is if you're a monk. If you're a monk, unfortunately, they don't allow you to retire. I don't know, what's the retirement age in Malaysia? 55? I've only got a year to go. Does that mean that next year you won't be inviting me to the BGF anymore? I thought it was 65. My goodness me, that's soft. But that's in Australia. Men 65, they retire. But not monks. When you get 65, that's when the work really starts. Because the older you are, the more venerable you are, and the harder you're expected to work. Look at the poor chief priest, chief reverend. How old is he now? 87. He has to work so hard he can't retire. I'm in the wrong profession. I'm going to start a union, a monks' union. Ask for better rights. No, I'm very happy. So the point is that eventually we get old. And when we can get old gracefully, we can just let everything go. And eventually there comes a time when you have to let your body go and disappear. And I've seen too many people at the time of their death struggling to live. Don't keep struggling in an old body to keep on going. You've had enough. Your old body is worn out like an old car. Really, it shouldn't be allowed out on the road anymore. For a lot of people, so old they're still allowed out into life. But when it's a time to go, remember Anicca. It's all passing now. It doesn't belong to us. We only rent this body for so many years. It's on loan to us. You aren't your body. You should know that. I'll talk about that with Anicca. And just allow everything to pass away. When I said the real meaning of Anicca, when I learnt Pali, I realized there was something called the opposite of Anicca, was Nicca. And there was a type of food which was allowed in the Vinaya to monks called Nicca food. What Nicca food meant was somebody who would go to the monastery on a certain day every week, say Wednesday. They would always go every Wednesday to give a regular supply of food. The regular was Nicca, something which would happen constantly the same day every week on a Wednesday. That was called Nicca, butter, Nicca food. What Nicca also meant was a regular, something which was always there, something stable, constant, repeated. And then I understood another meaning of Anicca, when that which was regular, which was always there, suddenly disappears. And you realized it wasn't really regular, it wasn't always there, it disappears. Now this is a deeper part of this talk. When you get into deep meditation, you find things which were always there suddenly disappear. Things which you thought were constant in your life are gone. You know what it's like sometimes you have a mother, she's always been there for you, and suddenly she dies. Something constant is no longer there. It's a shock to many people. That's what grief can sometimes be. Realizing that something which was always there is now gone. But in meditation, there's even more profound things disappear. Sometimes it's your body disappears in deep meditation. You thought it was always there, and now it's gone. That's why in deep meditation, when your body disappears, sometimes people get afraid. Where am I? But even more so, when your will disappears in deep meditation, when you can't do anything, even the potential to do things has been taken away from you. You're frozen, you're stuck. A consciousness with an inability to move. Now, something which was always there is no longer there. Now, these are the experiences of Anicca which shock you to the very core. I describe it like a person who's watching the waves on the ocean. You see the waves go up and go down, and you think the rise and fall is what impermanence truly means. But that's only superficial impermanence. But one day, you're watching the ocean, seeing those waves go up and down, and suddenly, without warning, beyond all expectations, the ocean disappears, together with all the landmass which surrounds it. It's all vanished and gone. It's not supposed to go, but it has. Only then do you realize impermanence is not just rise and fall. Impermanence is also something which has always been there, has now disappeared. And what is it that's always been there, which has now disappeared? You. And to find out more, come later on this afternoon to understand more about non-self. So, that was the advert for this afternoon, so you don't go away.